If you want to improve your English while hearing a story that can change the way you see your life, this one is for you. This is not just a story about technology. It's about you and what you can achieve when you don't give up. Steve Jobs, From Adopted Child to Technology King, made by Ingley-Tell.
Part 1. The Unwanted Child. It was a cold day in San Francisco on February 24, 1955. In the city hospital, a baby was crying. His mother, Joanne, was only 23 years old and very scared. She had no husband and no money to buy food or clothes for her baby. "I'm sorry, but I have to give you to a better family," she said softly to her son. A nice couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, were waiting to adopt this baby. They were not rich, but they had big hearts full of love. They took the baby home and named him Stephen Paul Jobs. Paul Jobs worked with his hands fixing cars. Clara Jobs worked in an office. They lived in a small house in Mountain View, California. They made a promise to Steve's birth mother. "We will make sure this boy goes to college." From the beginning, little Steve was different. At 2 years old, he took apart his toys to see how they worked. He asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? How do cars move? His parents tried to answer all his questions. Paul loved to work in his garage with tools and wood. When Steve was 4, Paul gave him a corner of the garage. "This is your space," his father said. "Here, you can build anything." Paul taught Steve to use tools. "When you make something," Paul said, "even the parts people cannot see must be perfect." This lesson stayed with Steve forever. Everything must be perfect, even the hidden parts. When Steve was 6 years old, something happened that changed him forever. He was playing with a neighbor girl in his backyard when she said, "You know your parents are not your real parents, right? Your real parents didn't want you." Steve ran into the house with tears in his eyes. "Is it true?" he asked Paul and Clara. "Did my real parents not want me?" Paul and Clara sat down with Steve and held his hands. "Steve," Clara said gently, "we chose you. We wanted you more than anything in the world. Your birth mother loved you very much, but she could not take care of you. So she found us, and we were so happy." Paul looked into Steve's eyes and said, "You are our son. You are special, and we will always love you." But those words from his friend stayed in Steve's mind. Deep inside, he felt that he had to prove he was worthy of love. He had to show the world that he was important. This feeling would push him to work harder than anyone else. It would make him want to create things that no one had ever seen before. Years later, when Steve Jobs became famous around the world, people would ask him about his childhood. He would always say, "Paul and Clara Jobs were my parents. They loved me and made me who I am." He never forgot the two people who chose to love him when he had nothing. And this is how the story began, with an unwanted baby who would grow up to be wanted by the whole world. Part 2. The Rebel's Awakening. As Steve grew up, his need to prove himself became stronger. In high school, he had long hair, wore old clothes, and walked around without shoes. He asked too many questions and never followed rules. Other students thought he was strange, but Steve didn't care. In 1972, when Steve was 17, his parents sent him to Reed College in Oregon. But after just one semester, Steve made a shocking decision. "I'm dropping out of college," he told them. Paul and Clara were heartbroken. They had saved every dollar for his education. But Steve stayed on campus as a ghost student. He slept on friends' floors, returned Coke bottles for food money, and only went to classes that interested him, like calligraphy, where he learned about beautiful letters and design. This class would later inspire the beautiful fonts in Apple computers. Steve was searching for answers about life. He read books about Buddhism and decided to travel to India to find enlightenment. In 1974, at age 19, He flew to India alone. But India disappointed him. Instead of wise teachers, he found poverty and disease. He got very sick and lost weight. The spiritual gurus seemed more interested in money than wisdom. After a few months, Steve returned to California. The trip taught him an important lesson. He had to find his own path in life. Back home, Steve needed a job. He applied to Atari, a video game company. He walked into their office wearing sandals and old clothes. The manager hired him because of his energy and intelligence. Steve worked the night shift because his coworkers complained about his difficult personality. But working alone at night was perfect. He could think and learn about electronics. During this time, Steve met someone who would change his life forever. Through a friend, he was introduced to Steve Wozniak, a shy, brilliant engineer 5 years older. Woz was a genius with electronics who could build amazing things with computer chips. The two Steves became friends immediately, but were very different. Woz was quiet and kind, happy to build things for joy. Steve Jobs was loud and demanding, always thinking about money and changing the world. One evening in 1975, Woz showed Steve something incredible in his garage, a small computer that could display letters on a TV screen. "I built a computer that anyone could use at home," Woz said excitedly. Steve looked at the machine and saw something Woz did not see. While Woz saw a hobby project, Steve saw the future. He saw millions of people wanting personal computers. "Woz," Steve said with excitement, "we have to start a company and sell these computers. This is going to change everything." And with those words, the partnership that would revolutionize the world was born. Part 3. Birth of a Revolution. Steve Jobs had a vision, but turning it into reality would not be easy. In early 1976, he convinced Woz to leave his safe job and start a company together. "We're going to build computers that regular people can use," Steve said. They needed money to start. Steve sold his Volkswagen van for $1,500, and Woz sold his calculator for $500. With just $2,000, they started Apple Computer Company in Paul Jobs' garage in Los Altos. The garage was small and crowded. Paul moved his tools to make room. Steve set up a desk, and Woz built computers on a wooden table. They worked from morning until night, building their first product, the Apple I computer. The Apple I was very basic, just a circuit board with no keyboard or monitor. But for computer lovers in 1976, it was amazing. Most computers then were huge machines that filled rooms. The Apple I could sit on a desk. Steve walked into the Byte Shop, a computer store in Mountain View. The owner, Paul Terrell, looked at this long-haired young man in sandals and almost said no. But Steve was convincing. "This computer will change how people think about technology," he promised. Terrell ordered 50 computers, but he wanted them complete, not as circuit boards. "I need computers that people can use right away," he said. Steve agreed, though they had no idea how to build 50 computers quickly. Back in the garage, Steve and Woz worked day and night. Friends and family helped. Steve's sister put parts together. His friend tested circuits. Paul Jobs helped with wooden cases. Clara kept everyone fed. They had 30 days to build 50 computers. Steve pushed everyone to work faster. "We can't fail," he kept saying. "This is our chance." On the final day, they delivered the last computer. Terrell paid them $25,000, more money than they had ever seen. Apple Computer Company was officially in business. But Steve wanted something better. "Our next computer needs to be perfect," he told Woz. "Beautiful, powerful, and under $1,000. Woz designed the Apple II, while Steve focused on making it look amazing. He chose a sleek plastic case and picked colors carefully. "People judge products by how they look," Steve explained. The Apple II was revolutionary. It had color graphics, sound, and could run games and business programs. Most importantly, it looked friendly and modern. But they needed much more money. Through a friend, Steve found Mike Markula, a successful businessman who had made millions at Intel. Steve showed him the Apple II prototype in the garage. "I want to invest in your company," Markula said. "I'll put in $250,000. This was more money than Steve and Woz had ever dreamed of. With Markula's investment, Apple was no longer just two friends in a garage. They were a real company with big dreams and the money to make them come true. The revolution was about to begin. Part 4. Rise of the Empire. With Mike Markula's money, Apple moved out of the garage in 1977. They rented a real office in Cupertino, California. Steve was only 22 years old, but he was now co-founder of a serious technology company. The Apple II launched in April 1977 and changed everything. It was the first computer that regular people could actually use. Teachers bought them for schools. Families played games on them. The computer that started in a garage was now in homes across America. Sales exploded beyond anyone's dreams. In 1977, Apple sold $7.8 million worth of computers. By 1980, they sold $117 million. Steve had become one of the youngest millionaires in America. Steve was a perfectionist in everything. He walked through Apple's offices checking every detail. If he saw a computer with scratches, he would get angry. "This is not perfect," he would shout. Many employees were scared of Steve, but they respected him because he made them do their best work. Steve believed technology should be beautiful, not just functional. While other companies made ugly brown boxes, Apple computers looked sleek and modern. "Why should computers be ugly?" Steve asked. He created a special culture at Apple. "We're not just making computers," Steve told his team. "We're giving people tools to think differently and be more creative." In December 1980, Apple became a public company. Anyone could buy Apple stock. On the first day, Steve's shares were worth $256 million. At age 25, he was one of the richest young people in America. The success made Steve more confident and demanding. He pushed his teams to work harder than ever. But he also made enemies inside Apple. Some managers thought Steve was too difficult. They complained he took credit for others' work and criticized employees publicly. Steve didn't care about being nice. "We don't have time to be comfortable," he would say. "We're racing to build the future." By 1983, Apple was selling more than 1 million computers per year. Steve appeared on magazine covers and became famous worldwide. The adopted child who once felt unwanted was now wanted by everyone. But Steve's greatest challenge was coming. He had built a successful company, but could he keep it successful? Could he work with other people, or would his difficult personality destroy everything? Success was just the beginning of his story. Part 5. The Great Fall. By 1983, Apple was one of the most exciting companies in the world, but success brought new challenges. Steve was young, brilliant, and full of ideas, but some people at Apple thought he was too unpredictable to lead. To help him, Apple's board of directors suggested hiring an experienced CEO. Steve agreed, but only if they could find someone he admired. When he met John Sculley, the president of Pepsi, Steve leaned forward and asked the question that would become famous. "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Sculley joined Apple in 1983, and at first, things were great. "We're going to change everything," Steve told his team after Sculley's arrival. Steve focused on new products, while Sculley ran the business. Together, they launched the Macintosh in 1984. The Mac was beautiful, friendly, and easy to use. But behind the scenes, trouble was growing. The Macintosh was expensive, and sales were slower than expected. Steve became frustrated and harder to work with. "This isn't good enough," he would shout in meetings. "We can do better." Some employees loved his passion. Others felt exhausted and afraid. Inside Apple's boardroom, a power struggle began. Scully and several board members believed Steve's management style was hurting the company. Steve believed they didn't understand his vision. "If we keep playing it safe, we'll lose," he argued. The tension exploded in 1985 when Scully and the board made a shocking decision. Steve would no longer run the Macintosh team. To Steve, it felt like betrayal. "This is my company," he told a friend. "I built it from nothing." Now he was being sidelined. Rather than remain in a powerless position, Steve chose to resign from Apple. He was only 30 years old. The newspapers wrote about it everywhere. Apple founder fired from his own company. Steve later admitted, "I was a very public failure." For weeks he felt lost. He stayed at home, avoiding calls from friends. He walked in the hills near his house, replaying the events in his mind. Slowly, a new thought began to grow. Maybe getting fired was the best thing that ever happened to me? Steve realized he was free to start again, free to try new ideas without limits. Part 6. Wilderness and Rebirth. Steve did not waste his freedom. Within months of leaving Apple, he began planning a new company where he could start fresh. "We're going to build something amazing," he told a close friend. He called the new company Next. His goal was to create a powerful computer for universities and scientists, a machine that could help solve big problems. NextT's computers were beautifully designed. They had sleek black cases, advanced hardware, and a modern operating system. Every detail showed Steve's perfectionism, from the packaging to the mouse. "It's not just a computer," he told his designers. "It's a work of art." But the computers were very expensive, so only a few people could buy them. Sales stayed small, but Steve used Next as a place to try new ideas without compromise. At the same time, Steve made another bold move. In 1986, he bought a small computer graphics division from filmmaker George Lucas for $10 million. It was called Pixar. At first, Pixar sold animation software, but Steve believed the real magic came from the creative team led by John Lasseter. "You guys are going to change storytelling forever," Steve told them. They began making short films to prove that one day a full-length movie could be made with computers. The following years were tough. Next had trouble finding customers, and Pixar's projects made little money. "We just have to keep going," Steve insisted in meetings, even when others felt discouraged. He invested his own money into both companies, keeping them alive. In 1995, Pixar released Toy Story, the first full-length movie made entirely with computer animation. It became a huge success, loved by audiences and critics. Overnight, Pixar became a leader in animation, and the success made Steve a billionaire. "This is just the beginning," he told reporters. Next never became popular, but its software and design would later become the foundation of Apple's future products. Reflecting on those years, Steve said, "It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it." The wilderness years had humbled and strengthened him. Soon, he would return to Apple for one of the greatest comebacks in business history. Part 7. The Impossible Return. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. Sales were falling, products were outdated, and the company was losing money. Many believed Apple was only months away from bankruptcy. "If we don't act now," one executive said in a tense meeting, "Apple won't survive another year." The solution came from an unexpected place: Steve Jobs' company Next. When the deal was announced, Steve told reporters, "I'm thrilled to be back. Apple has always been in my heart." Apple bought Next for $429 million, and as part of the deal, Steve returned to the company he had co-founded more than 20 years earlier. At first, Steve came back only as an advisor. But his sharp questions and bold ideas quickly made it clear that his energy, vision, and leadership were needed more than ever. In 1997, the board made him interim CEO, or, as Steve joked during a company meeting, the ICEO. The company had dozens of confusing, overlapping products. "This is crazy," Steve told his team, pointing at a messy chart of product lines. "We're going to fix this." He cut the lineup from more than a dozen models to just 4, 2 for consumers, 2 for professionals. "Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do," he said. This bold move shocked many, but it allowed Apple to focus on quality instead of quantity. At the same time, Steve launched a marketing campaign that would become legendary, Think Different. The ads celebrated rebels, dreamers, and people who changed the world. "This is about who we are," Steve explained to the marketing team. "We're not just selling computers, we're selling a vision." He formed a surprising partnership with Microsoft, Apple's longtime rival. Bill Gates invested $150 million in Apple and promised to keep making Microsoft Office for Mac. The news shocked the tech world, but it gave Apple the stability it desperately needed. Slowly, Apple began to recover. New products were simpler, more beautiful, and more innovative. Customers returned, and for the first time in years, people were excited about Apple again. Steve's return marked the beginning of a new era, one that would take Apple from the edge of collapse to the top of the world. Part 8. The Innovation King. With Apple back on its feet, Steve turned his attention to creating products that would redefine entire industries. He believed technology should not only work well, but also be beautiful, simple, and a joy to use. The first big step came in 1998 with the iMac. Designed with bright colors and a playful shape, the iMac was unlike any computer the world had seen. It was powerful, easy to use, and looked like a piece of art. The iMac became a huge success, bringing style and personality into personal computing. But Steve was only getting started. In 2001, Apple launched the iPod, a small music player that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. The slogan was simple but powerful: 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod changed how people listened to music and made Apple a leader in digital entertainment. Then, in 2007, came the iPhone. It was more than just a phone. It combined a phone, an iPod, and an internet device into one. Its touchscreen interface was revolutionary. The iPhone transformed the mobile phone industry and changed how people interacted with technology. In 2010, Apple introduced the iPad, a tablet computer that created a whole new category of devices. Critics were unsure at first, but the iPad quickly became popular for browsing the web, reading books, watching videos, and more. Under Steve's leadership, each product followed the same principles: simplicity, beauty, and a focus on the user experience. These innovations not only made Apple one of the most profitable companies in the world, but also influenced the design of technology everywhere. By the end of the 2000s, Steve Jobs was no longer just the co-founder of Apple. He was seen as the greatest innovator of his generation, the man who brought together art and technology in a way that changed the world. Part 9. The Final Challenge. In 2003, Steve received news that would change his life forever. Doctors discovered a rare form of pancreatic cancer. "We've found something," one doctor told him quietly. Steve sat in silence, processing the words. At first, he delayed surgery, hoping alternative treatments might work. "I want to try my way first," he told friends. For 9 months, he experimented with diets and therapies, but eventually he agreed to an operation. For a time, it seemed as if he had beaten the illness. Even during treatment, Steve remained deeply involved at Apple. "We're not stopping," he told his team. He pushed forward with new product launches and major innovations, keeping details of his health private. In 2008, his noticeably thinner appearance caused public concern. A journalist asked about his health, but Steve simply smiled and said, "Apple is doing great. That's what matters." He took a 6-month medical leave to receive a liver transplant, returning later that year with his trademark energy. "Let's make something insanely great," he told designers at his first meeting back. Despite his struggles, he introduced groundbreaking products, including new iPhones, iPads, and operating systems that shaped the company's future. In August 2011, Steve resigned as CEO, naming Tim Cook as his successor. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "I believe Apple's brightest and most innovative days are ahead of it." He remained as chairman of the board, continuing to guide Apple in whatever way he could. Just a few months after stepping down, on the 5th of October 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. His death sent shockwaves around the world. Outside Apple stores, people left flowers, messages, and candles. One note read, "Thank you for changing my life." Tributes came from political leaders, business icons, artists, and millions of everyday people whose lives had been touched by his work. Steve's final years proved his determination to keep creating until his last days. He once said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose." Part 10. The Eternal Legacy. Steve Jobs left more than products behind. He left a way of thinking. He proved that technology could be both useful and beautiful, that design matters, and that focus is more powerful than trying to do everything at once. He showed that one person with a clear vision can inspire thousands to work toward the same dream. Apple became the world's most valuable company, but Steve's true success was changing how people interact with technology every day. From the computer on a student's desk, to the phone in a worker's hand, to the tablet in a child's backpack, his influence can be seen everywhere. His story is a reminder that setbacks are not the end, but an opportunity to start again with more wisdom. Being pushed out of Apple could have ended his career, yet it became the turning point that prepared him for an even greater chapter. Steve taught the world to dream big, to care about every detail, and to never settle for good enough. He once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." What you need is vision, courage, and the determination to keep going when others give up. Steve Jobs' legacy is not just in the devices we hold, it is in the belief that the world can be shaped by bold ideas and fearless action. That belief can live in each of us, inspiring the next generation of dreamers, rebels, and visionaries to create the future.
Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe to English Tell, and let's learn English through amazing stories together.